Live from the International McNeil Film Studios in beautiful Baja Tustin. You would think after how many years I would get this right.
I had 10 years to do it.
Here is Professor Mark McNeil.
Grazie, graziati. This is it, I think. This is the international accounts. So we're doing international trade. We did international finance in the first part of this video. So every exchange that takes place between countries is supposedly recorded by the governments at the docks and at the borders as the goods come in and go out. And they keep the books. These are the international accounts. Now this is a principles version of it. But when they count this, there are two major categories, the current accounts, which are broken down into merchandise trade, that's goods going back and forth, including machinery, things that we would call capital or investment. If it's produced goods, it's merchandise. Services, giant things like entertainment services, financial services, psychiatric services, design services, tourist services those are services, and it's enormous for the United States these days. Income from foreign assets. So when the United States has, is it Singapore Disneyland? They get money as people come to the Singapore Disneyland. They pay the costs, they pay all the people and the rent and the electricity and all that stuff. And what's left over is profit to the Disney company. And when they bring that profit back to Burbank, California, the Disney headquarters, that's accounted for in the current accounts right there, income from foreign assets. And finally, transfer payments. There's just a whole lot of money that goes back and forth that is not in exchange for something. So at the college, lots of foreign students receive money every month from their parents or families or the foreign government or something, and those transfers of money would be counted as in the current accounts transfer category. So those are the current accounts, and the second set of accounts is the capital accounts. The capital accounts are from the purchase or sale of assets, either physical assets or financial assets. So there's staggering amounts of U.S. government bonds that are purchased by foreigners because the government is running a staggering deficit these days and has a big debt. And so when foreigners buy those U.S. government bonds, it is accounted for here in the capital accounts as financial assets. And when somebody buys a stock in General Motors or if they buy factories, I believe, in the United States, then that would be accounted for in the capital accounts. And the most important thing to remember is the current account plus the capital account equals zero. So routinely, the United States runs something like an $800 billion deficit in its current accounts, which means the United States is buying $800 billion more from the rest of the world than the rest of the world is buying from us. That's a current account deficit, which means that in the capital accounts, the U.S. must have an $800 billion surplus because the current accounts plus the capital accounts equals zero. One must offset the other. And so, like, if the United States is buying more this stuff from the rest of the world, but the rest of the world is investing in our bonds and buying factories here and so forth, is that good or bad? Would we be better off if we reversed it? That's a long argument, and it's just not clear that that's the case, that the United States would be better off. So there are terms. The balance of trade. There would be a balance of trade if, on the current accounts, the exact amount of merchandise the U.S. bought from the rest of the world is how much the rest of the world bought from us. That would be balance of trade. Now, there's also a balance that is published. This is a data thing that is published periodically, certainly once a year, and it's the balance in the current account. So You know, how much does the U.S. buy in current accounts from the rest of the world compared to the rest of the world buying from us? We're normally in deficit in the current accounts. We have big merchandise deficits, but our services are normally in surplus. But overall, we have a deficit in the current accounts. That's normal for us. And when we look at these things, there are debits and credits. And again, this is not accounting or very sophisticated either, but generally speaking, a debit is some transaction that involves money going out of the U.S., dollars or money going out. And a credit transaction is one that has money coming in. So there are debits and credit entries in these accounts. We've already done the foreign exchange market. So for any transaction, I would like you to be able to tell me which account would it be accounted for in which account would it be accounted for? Is the transaction a debit or a credit from the U.S. point of view? Will it affect the supply or the demand in the foreign exchange markets? You will recall that the supply of dollars, the way that we set this up, this is the dollar market where dollars are exchanged for SOCs, and the rate that you see here is SOCs per dollar, 3-to-1. In this market, the supply of dollars depends on American people who want to buy SOC, goods, services, or assets, because in order to buy the asset, they have to first sell the dollars to get the SOCs so that they can buy the asset. That's the fundamental fact of international trade, is there are different currencies. And different laws as well. But the fact there are different currencies means that in order to exchange goods, there has to be a separate foreign exchange transaction for the monies to make that exchange. And that's what the foreign exchange markets are all about. And they're humongous. There are at least $2 trillion a day worth of money being passed back and forth. And 80% or so of that money, of those transactions, has dollars on one side or the other of it. So, which account is affected? Is it a debit or a credit? Will it affect the supply or the demand? The demand depends on SOC people who want to buy U.S. goods, services, or assets, because they have to buy the dollars in order to make that exchange. As a result of this, which currency would appreciate and which would depreciate, and show it in the market. So I want you to be able to do this. So for instance, I am buying an outstanding bottle of 20-year-old Scotch from SOC. Can you tell me in which account would this be accounted for? And the answer is current accounts, merchandise. Will it, from the U.S. point of view, be a debit or a credit? Will it cause money to come into the United States or go out of the United States? The answer is debit. Because I'm getting the Scotch and I'm paying money. It's going out. Now, technically, the dollars don't necessarily go to SOC, but they go as far as the foreign exchange markets, at least. And then will it affect the supply or the demand for in the foreign exchange markets? Well, it's U.S. people, that's me, wanting to buy a SOC bottle of 20-year-old Scotch. So it will affect the supply. And when the supply increases, if the supply were to increase here, we would get a new equilibrium somewhere south of 3 SOCs to the dollar. So the exchange rate would go down. Which currency appreciates? And the answer is the SOC, and which depreciates? The dollar. You can see that the dollar has depreciated, which means if the dollar depreciates, the SOC has to have appreciated. And finally, show it in the diagram in the foreign exchange markets, and we would show it here. So the quantity would increase a little bit, and 2.9 or something, the dollar depreciates a little bit. So what if a Japanese film studio buys Sony? I think this did happen. Sony Pictures. And the answer is Which account? It's a capital account because it's an asset, either physical or financial. If they're buying the buildings, that's one thing. If they're buying the stock, that's still that would be financial, but it's still capital account. And will it be a debit or credit from the United States point of view? Well, when they sell that, a lot of money is going to come back toward the United States, so that is a credit transaction. Will it affect the supply or the demand in the foreign exchange markets? Well, that Japanese company has to buy the dollars to buy the studio, which means the demand would increase. And when the demand increases, we end up with a higher, an equilibrium at a higher rate of exchange. So the US dollar would appreciate and the SOC would depreciate. Show it, I would draw the demand curve here somewhere. I'm trying to not get this too messed up. But for any exchange, I want you to be able to tell me that. And if it's in the current accounts, which of the subcategories? Merchandise, services, earnings on foreign investment, and whatever the other one was. Transfer payments. So, you know, let's say that this exchange rate is three to the dollar. Is that what it should be? Economists can't help themselves. They ask that question. What should the exchange rate be between one currency and another? And economists have come up with the most beautiful, logical answer that everybody loves when they hear it. And it just makes so much sense, and that's why we can't give it up. And it is called PPP, Purchasing Power Parity. Purchasing Power Parity. That's PPP. And it says a currency should buy as much goods and services in one country as it buys in the other country after you make the foreign exchange. So in this case, a dollar should buy a dollar's worth. If the exchange rate is 3 to the dollar, a dollar should buy a dollar's worth of goods in the United States, and it should buy $3 worth of goods in SOC. So that a dollar buys the same amount in both countries. And if not, what if a dollar here bought 3 SOCs worth of stuff? I'm sorry, a dollar here bought a dollar's worth of stuff, but a dollar spent, that same dollar after you make the exchange conversion, buys 5 SOCs worth of goods and services from SOC. Well, what that means is it's not purchasing power parity, that the dollar spent in SOC buys more than it does in the United States, which means the exchange rate is off, and what should happen is the exchange rate should go closer to 5 SOCs per dollar, because Americans would be wanting wanting to buy lots of stuff because it buys more in SOC than it does in the United States, and then the exchange rate should balance those two things. I don't have time to go into it very carefully at the moment. So that's what it should be, but economists have a very hard time finding instances in which a dollar buys the same amount of goods and services it does in the United States as in other countries. That the purchasing power parity does not seem to be a good predictor of what the exchange rates will be, because there's PPPP, which stands for Purchasing Power Parity Problems. And there are lots of problems. Now, the rules are different, oftentimes the goods are different. Not all goods trade. So a haircut, if a haircut is cheaper in SOC than it is in the United States, it doesn't help an American. They can't buy their haircuts from SOC because there are travel costs and so forth. There's this thing called the Big Mac Index where they do this, and they ask how many dollars does a Big Mac cost after you make the currency conversion in various countries of the world. And by this standard, if a Big Mac here in the United States costs $5.50, is that correct? Federico, do you know how much a Big Mac costs?
I think it costs around
$5?
Yeah, $5-6.
I think they say $5.50. Okay, but if you were to do the same transaction as trade the dollars to buy a Big Mac in, I believe it was Russia and one other place, maybe like Serbia or something, that it costs, that you could buy a Big Mac in those places for $2.60. Whereas if you went to Switzerland, for that Big Mac, it would cost you $6.50 or $7. So clearly purchasing power parity is a little off, but it's still a very good basis for analyzing this stuff. And finally, exchange rate systems in the old, so old cube, so that's old days, there was the specie flow mechanism. Specie means gold or silver. So gold and silver was money anywhere. And if the goods came this way, the gold went that way. And it was self-balancing in the sense that if country A wanted to buy lots and lots of stuff from country B, then the B would send goods to country A, and country A would send gold. And that made for more gold being in that country, in country B, and less gold in country A. Have I mixed the A's and B's? Anyway, and so when there's more gold in one country, that causes inflation, and when there's less gold here, it causes deflation, and eventually the exchange rate causes the prices to be in whack with each other again. And it tends to balance the amount of imports and exports that the two countries want to do with each other. But that didn't work so well. There were problems, especially during World War I and World War II, especially with England. There were real problems with the gold standard. And so everybody left the gold standard, and after World War II, at Bretton Woods, the new world financial order was established, and it was the post-World War II order in which the International Monetary Fund was formed, the World Bank was formed, and GATT, the General Agreement on Trade and Tariffs. This GATT dealt with trade. The World Bank dealt with development. So after World War II, the world order wanted countries to develop and prosper because they thought they would be more peaceful if they were. And the International Monetary Fund dealt with exchange rate changes. GATT has morphed into WTO, which is the World Trade Organization today, but it serves the same purpose. GATT's job was to get the tariffs down as low as possible and to get as free a trade as is possible. And they did a great job of that, I think. They had other problems as well. So, but there were fixed exchange rates. The dollar was fixed to gold. The dollar was fixed to gold, and then every other currency was fixed to the dollar. So the dollar was fixed at 28, then $35 to the ounce, and then every other currency's value traded against the dollar at 5 to 1, 3 to 1, etc. And the system was supposed to make fixed exchange rates because whenever there's a foreign trade, there are two risks. The one risk is if you buy the goods, can you sell them for what you think that you can sell them for? That's a risk. But then in addition to that, there's the risk of foreign exchange rates changing. So that you think, oh, I can buy these at 3 to the dollar, and then all of a sudden your dollar's only worth 2 socks, and now you have to pay more dollars for the same deal, and it makes it riskier. So the fixed exchange rate was supposed to reduce the risks of international trade and encourage international trade, and it was gone by 1974. The United States could not maintain this position, this pivotal position. There's a lot of reasons why, but I don't have time. And so after 1974, we didn't have fixed exchange rate systems, we had a floating exchange rate system. And that just means that the supply and the demand for currencies in free markets determined the exchange rate. And that's how it's been ever since. There was for a while what are called dirty floats, where if the exchange rate got out beyond what the governments thought it should be, governments would intervene and they would buy or sell one currency or the other to try and get the exchange rate back to where they wanted it to be. But in the end, these foreign exchange markets are too large and they're too big to move or to push around these days. So we get a clean float, which is just pure supply and demand determining it. The relative values of the currencies. And finally, what does the future hold? These are always great issues. Will there be one currency? The dollar has a good, kind of a good shot at it, I suppose. Had a very good shot here at it. I think nations like to keep their currencies, so I think probably there won't be one currency. gold-based money is supposed to be an A. Will we ever return to a gold standard where the dollar can exchange for gold at, I don't know, $1,000 an ounce or something? And anytime you don't like your paper, you can just turn it in for gold, and that makes sure that the paper currencies are not overprinted and cause inflation. I don't think that's going to happen, although there are a lot of people who support it. Do you think we would ever get a Bitcoin type of money? That happens to be Federico's favorite, and I suspect would be very happy if it happened. But Federico, do you think it's going to happen?
No.
Why not?
Same reason they won't have one currency.
Why won't they have one currency?
Because governments don't like to lose control of.
Governments don't like to lose control of their currency and lose the seigniorage. That's the profit from printing the money. So I don't know. It's a interesting world. Will there be some digital electronic exchange system that replaces money? It's an incredible world. Anyway, I would like to thank you all. I think we're about done with these videos. Could be we'll have a few more, but it's not looking like it. And it's been a tremendous pleasure.